This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. If you click on the link in the description below, it'll take you to their store and they'll know I sent you there. Hi everyone, I'm Nitsahone, and it's Wednesday, so that means it's time for another MTG Top 10, the series where I rank cards based on their historical performance and Magic's highest level of competition. Lately, I've looked at several stat lines for 1-mana creatures. So far in 2021, I've looked at 1-mana 1/1s, 1-mana 2/1s, and 1-mana 2/2s, and today I'm sort of concluding this mini-series with a look at 1-mana 1/2s. It's the final stat line for 1-mana creatures where there are enough cards for me to do an MTG Top 10. Like 2/1s and 2/2s, 1-mana 1/2s tend to be pretty aggressive. A 1-mana 1/2 on its own usually isn't enough for a good creature, as it's quickly overpowered by most 2-drops, but if you add a few other things to a 1/2, you tend to end up with a pretty nice card. In all, there are 70 1-mana 1/2s in this whole game, and in this video we'll talk about the 10 that have left the biggest impact on competitive Magic. Before we get started, here's a quick reminder on how I score cards in these videos. A top 8 at a Pro Tour, Players Tour, Mythic Championship, Mythic Invitational, Legacy, or Vintage Championship is worth 2 points, and a top 8 at a Magic Fest or Grand Prix is worth 1 point. At number 10 it is Giant Killer, which has a whole lot going on for a 1-mana 1/2. Giant Killer can just be played as a 1-mana 1/2 that can tap other creatures down, and sometimes that's what you want to be doing, but it also comes with a powerful adventure that can kill creatures with power 4 or greater as an instant. After you cast Chop Down, you can then cast the Giant Killer part of the card at any point later in the game. While the removal effect is somewhat restrictive, the fact that you can always just play the Giant Killer as a creature really makes up for that. You have the floor of a better Master Decoy, and the ceiling for Giant Killer is that you get a 2-for-1, which is excellent. Giant Killer fits well into multiple types of decks. In aggro decks that want to curve out, he can help you curve out early, and there aren't many other 1-drop creatures that become removal spells late. In more mid-rangey and controlling decks, you're more likely to find a way to take advantage of the 2-for-1 part on a regular basis. So far, all of Giant Killer's points have come in Standard, where it has gained points in aggro decks like White Weenie and Winota, as well as Fires of Invention, Omnath Ramp, and Blue-White Control. It is still in Standard for a bit longer, and could continue to add to its score. It doesn't have any points in any other formats yet, but it is being played some in Historic, Pioneer, and Modern, so it may just be a matter of time before it improves its score. At number 9, it is Minister of Inquiries. Most of the 1-mana 1/2s on this list spend a significant amount of time attacking, but not this one. The Minister is from Kaladesh and features the Energy mechanic. Like most cards that use energy, the Minister produces its own, and then has an ability that lets you do something with that energy. In this case, you get to mill 3 cards, and it can be your cards or your opponent's. Unlike most energy cards that saw play at the highest level, Minister of Inquiries wasn't played in energy decks. Instead, it was primarily used in God Pharaoh's gift decks, where its ability to mill a total of 6 cards for only 1 mana was a pretty big deal, and if you had a few other ways to produce energy, it can do an even better job of stocking your graveyard. It hasn't gained any points since rotating out of Standard. At number 8, it is Flameblade Adapt. It has the same overall score as Minister of Inquiries, but it had more Pro Tour top 8s, so I used that as a tiebreaker. This 1-mana 1/2 has Menace, and it gains +1/+0 anytime you discard or cycle a card. In the right deck, this means that Flameblade can do a whole lot of damage for very little investment. There wasn't really a discard or cycling deck in Standard, so Flameblade Adapt never gained any points there. However, the Adapt has gained some significant points in non-rotating formats where it's much easier to buff. In Modern, it found success in Hollow 1 decks, which were loaded up with ways to draw and discard tons of cards, like Faithless Looting and Burning Inquiry, making it easy to cast Hollow 1 for 0 mana, and obviously all of that stuff also makes Flameblade Adapt huge in the very early game, and because he has Menace, he's frequently just unblockable. Ultimately, Faithless Looting got banned out of Modern because a ton of powerful decks were abusing it, and Hollow 1 decks haven't really rebounded. However, Flameblade Adapt has gained its first points in Historic quite recently in Boros Cycling. This deck combines the various cycling payoffs from Amonkhet Remastered and Ikoria into a pretty powerful deck. It looks very likely that Flameblade Adapt will continue to gain points going forward. At number 7, it is Knight of the Ebon Legion. While the Knight starts out as a 1-mana 1/2, it doesn't keep those stats for very long. It gets a +1/+1 counter anytime a player loses 4 or more life in a turn. If you're an aggro deck, it is pretty easy to get those counters, especially because the Knight also comes with an activated ability that will make it into a 4/5 with Death Touch, and 3 mana for that is honestly a pretty good deal. Your opponent basically ends up in a pick your poison scenario. Do they double block the Knight to take it down, even though the Death Touch means it's a 2-for-1? Or do they take the hit from it and let it gain a counter? Each counter will make it harder for the Knight to die in combat too. Basically, the only way to effectively get rid of the Knight is removal, and even some of that is a bit challenging if its controller has mana up. Knight of the Ebon Legion was a fixture in various black aggro decks in Standard, a role it also fills in Pioneer. It seems likely it will continue to gain points. At number 6, it is Elvish Reclaimer, another 1-mana 1/2 with a whole bunch of text. If you can get 3 lands into your graveyard, the Reclaimer becomes a 3/4, which is pretty impressive for 1 mana. It isn't too difficult to pull that off either, since the Reclaimer lets you sacrifice lands to search up other lands from your library. Importantly, that ability can search up any land, including non-basic ones. That makes it great for tutoring up utility lands or helping you fix your mana. It didn't gain any points in Standard, or Pioneer, or Historic, or Modern, but it very quickly found a home in Legacy, where it's played in various decks that seek to win the game using Dark Depths. These decks run various ways to remove all of its counters to get a 20/20 creature immediately, including Thespian Stage, another land. Elvish Reclaimer helps you search up either part of the combo you might need. In addition to those cards, Dark Depths also tends to run a bunch of other singleton utility lands that are really helpful in specific situations, like Bojuka Bog, and the Reclaimer can help you there too. So, Elvish Reclaimer has quickly become a key card for the straight-up Dark Depths decks I have talked about already, but also lands decks, which can still win the game using Dark Depths, but they lean a lot harder in the land toolbox direction and can actually win the game with creatures too, running Knight of the Reliquary alongside the Reclaimer for 2 different creatures who can tutor up lands and get progressively larger while you do so. Elvish Reclaimer is a lock to continue to gain points in Legacy. At number 5, it is Getsu Lava Runner. This 1-mana 1/2 becomes a 2/2 with haste if you have 2 instants and or sorceries in your graveyard, basically making it into Goblin Guide. Getsu Lava Runner was a great fit for red deck wins in Standard, which played a lot of cheap creatures and burn spells, allowing the Lava Runner to very quickly become a 2/2. It fills a similar role in Pioneer, and is likely, like a lot of the cards on this list, to continue to add to its score. At number 4, it is Inventors Apprentice. This 1-mana 1/2 becomes a 1-mana 2/3 if you have an artifact in play, and that's a pretty great return on your investment. Obviously enough, the decks it has been featured in run plenty of artifacts that make the Apprentice into a 2/3 very quickly. Inventors Apprentice gained all of its points in Standard aggro decks, most of which had an artifact sub-theme, as a result of running a bunch of powerful vehicles or hyper-aggressive creatures like Beaumont Courier and Scrapheap Scrounger. It hasn't gained any points since rotating out of Standard, and is one of the few cards on this list not actively putting up points, so it is likely to slip in the future. Alright, so Inventor's Apprentice has 26 points. From here, we're making a huge leap to number 3, where we have Thraben Inspector with 88 points. This is a 1-mana 1/2 that gives you the ability to draw a card in the later game, and that's nice. After all, white doesn't get a whole lot of card draw. It was pretty much a staple while it was in Standard, showing up in just about any creature-based deck that had white in it. This included human tribal decks, as well as artifact-based aggro decks like Mardu Vehicles and Mardu Ballista, where the Inspector gave you a body that could crew your vehicles and an additional artifact for your payoffs. The Inspector also gained a few points in Modern Humans decks between 2017 and 2018, but it's no longer showing up in those decks and doesn't have any points anywhere since 2018. However, it was recently included in a historic anthology set on Magic Arena, and this may ultimately translate to some points in that format. At number 2, I've included 2 cards, Monastery Swiftspear and Soul Scar Mage. The 2 are very similar and even find themselves in the same decks in many formats, so it felt right to include them together here so we could talk about an additional card. Both are 1-mana 1/2s with prowess. The Swiftspear has haste, and the Soul Scar Mage trades that in for the ability to turn burn damage into -1/-1 counters. Both are great in aggressive red decks that seek to cast lots of cheap burn spells, as they tend to always attack as much larger creatures than 1/2s. They've been played in Standard, Pioneer, Modern, and Historic. The Swiftspear also has a few points in Legacy. If I'd separated the 2, the Swiftspear would be at number 2, and Soul Scar Mage would have been at number 4, just before Thraben Inspector. Both of these are going to continue to gain points, but I'm not sure they will ever catch the number 1 card on this list, which is, quite predictably, Deathrite Shaman. Deathrite Shaman does a whole bunch of stuff and is arguably the best 1-drop in the game. Sure, it needs some help to get going because it needs cards in graveyards, but the decks that run Deathrite Shaman don't really leave that up to chance, and just have a ton of ways to load up their own graveyard. Deathrite Shaman can function as a mana dork, allowing you to play 3-mana spells on turn 2, assuming you used a fetch land, and it can also provide a win condition, slowly killing your opponent by exiling cards in the graveyard, or it can help you stabilize, gaining you much needed life. On top of all of that, the Shaman also happens to provide some graveyard hate since it has to exile cards from graveyards to use its abilities. While it found some success in Standard, its power has been most abused in both Modern and Legacy, formats with access to easy ways to load the graveyard as well as fetch lands. In Modern, it was mostly featured in Birthing Pod and Jund decks. It eventually became clear that the card was too good for Modern though, and it got banned in February of 2014. In the short time it was legal in the format, it amassed 40 points, so banning it was probably a good call. It continued to be legal in Legacy though, where it was primarily featured in Delver decks. Just like in Modern though, Deathrite Shaman eventually proved to be too good for Legacy too, and it got banned in that format in July of 2018. It was legal in both Pioneer and Vintage, and in the latter, it has put up some points. However, with no real fetch lands in Pioneer, Deathrite Shaman is unlikely to gain any points there. Still, it has a fairly large lead over the other cards on this list, and if it can just continue to be relevant in Vintage, which it should be able to do, it will hold on to this spot. Well, those are the 10 1-mana 1/2s that have left the biggest impact on competitive Magic. If you need any of these, you can buy them at Card Kingdom. You can find an individual link for each of them in the description. If you enjoyed this video, please like it and share it so that others can enjoy it too. If you want to stay aware of future content, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. And if you want to catch up on other MTG top 10s, including others that look at creature stat lines, you should see some playlists on your screen now. Also, if you like my Magic content, consider giving my other YouTube channel a try. It's called Need to Hone History, and it looks at real-world history. Thanks for watching.